Hello everyone, Martin here, back with another Legacy video, this time doing a deck tech on Doomsday. So in this column here these are the cards that I think you need, either as playset, either as the way they are here. A couple of them you can maybe reduce the numbers on, but these are the cards that make up the sort of core of the deck. You've got your 4 Doomsdays, of course. You've got 4 Dark Rituals. I have tampered with going lower than 4, but I think that's incorrect. I've also tampered with removing the Lion's Diamond, but I think I always want one. And full disclosure, this is to put in the pile like a majority of the time. That's the main purpose of it. Incidentally, it will come up that it's really good to have in your hand. If you have, like, say, access to 3 black mana, you have the LED, and then you have, say, a Street Wraith to cycle. You can cycle into your pile post Doomsday and have 3 blue mana floating. But yeah, you obviously need at least 1 Thassa's Oracle. This is the actual win condition. And just in case there are people that are unfamiliar with how the combo works, what we do is we aim to cast Doomsday, which lets us tutor up basically 5 cards from between what is in our library and what's in our graveyard. And then the rest of the library and graveyard are exiled, and those 5 cards become our new deck. We get to stack them. So how that works with Thassa's Oracle is that Thassa's Oracle has a triggered ability when it enters the battlefield, where it looks at the cards that are left in your library, and then your devotion to blue, devotion being the number of blue mana symbols on permanents you control. And then it says if the number of cards in your library, or rather, if the number of blue mana symbols is greater than or equal to the number of cards in your library, you win the game. So basically, you can probably figure out that Doomsday reduces your library to 5 cards. Thassa's Oracle itself has 2 blue mana symbols, so if you have 2 or fewer cards left in your deck when Thassa's Oracle enters the battlefield, then you will win the game if Thassa's Oracle isn't removed. If you have 0 cards in your library, then it doesn't matter if Thassa's Oracle is removed. You win the game anyways. So with Doomsday, you usually will make one of a number of different sort of standard piles. I'll try and go through them, or at least 1 or 2 of them, because obviously a lot can change, and it's very situational. A card often used to draw into the pile, or to be the top card of your pile in the situations where you have to pass a turn, in which case you hope to get another turn, untap, draw the top of your new 5-card library, is Ideas Unbound. There are alternatives you can use. Basically, what you want is like raw card draw for as little mana as possible. Ideas Unbound draws you 3 cards for 2 mana, which is pretty amazing. Obviously, the discard 3 cards at the beginning of the next end step clause won't come into play if you win on this, the same turn. Other alternatives, we have Predict, which is also a nice card. You can couple that with Unearth. So how that would work is you put Predict on top of Thassa, and then you cast Predict targeting Thassa's Oracle, or rather, naming Thassa's Oracle targeting yourself. It goes into the graveyard, and then you draw an Unearth and a Lotus Petal, and then you can win. Other choices can be Night's Whisper, for instance, and there are a number of others that you could choose. All right, but you also want some number of Lotus Petals. Of the cards here, I think Lotus Petal is the one that you could choose to not play 4 of. I've for a long time played 3. I've played lists with 2. The more Lotus Petals you play, the bigger, I think that increases the amount of sort of turn 1, turn 2 Doomsdays. But you want some number of them because, so for instance, a standardized pile would be something like this. You put Thassa's Oracle on the bottom, say, 2 Lotus Petals on top of it, Edge of Autumn, and Ideas Unbound. And that lets you win with 2 blue mana. So either, like, obviously you have to draw the card first. So as you pass the turn, you untap, you spend 2 blue mana, and cast Ideas Unbound, drawing you these 3 cards. You need a land to be able to cycle the Edge of Autumn. If you fear that you might get wastelanded off of land, that was somehow a factor, you could switch Edge of Autumn with Street Wraith. And then you Edge of Autumn into the the Thassa's Oracle, and you have these 2 Lotus Petals to cast it. So you need some number of Lotus Petals, I think. Okay. So these are the cards that you need, but as you can see, that leaves a lot. That's 15 cards. Let's make it 14 with let's shave a Lotus Petal and say that you only really need 3, and the 4th is more for velocity. So that's 15 cards, and that means you have 45 cards that you can sort of not pick and choose exactly. I think some of these are probably, you want disruption and you want some cantrips, but there's a lot of flexibility. And in this version of the deck, we play these 11 disruption pieces. And that's what's really cool about this deck, I think, is that you can play a lot of disruption. And being on the 4 Lotus Petals, and just in general, being like a Dark Ritual fast combo deck, I think Daze is really, really great in this deck. It happens frequently that on turns 1 or 2, your opponent if you're on the play turn 1, they don't even have a mana to pay for Daze, but that people will tap out and just land Dark Ritual Doomsday in a Daze. That's a pretty potent turn 1 play, or like a turn 1 combo. You got your Force of Will, of course, in order to fight, power through your own Doomsday, but also to protect you from other turn 1 combo decks, or turn 2 nasty hate pieces or turn 1 or turn 2 nasty hate pieces, whatever, like Chalice of the Void. Mind you, this deck is not as vulnerable to Chalice of the Void as something like Storm combo is. I think Chalice of the Void on 0 against the Epic Storm, or Chalice of the Void on 1 against the Epic Storm, or against Ad Nauseam Tendrils is a pretty big hoser. Don't get me wrong, a Chalice of the Void on 1 against our deck here can be crippling. We have a lot of 1-drops, so you could be looking in, if you're on the draw and you don't have Force of Will, and they go Chalice of the Void on 1, and your hand is 3 lands and 4 1-drops, that's pretty bad. But the fact that you can just play out lands and tap 3 mana to cast Doomsday, and then you can always build a pile that can beat Chalice of the Void. I say always, but this deck is very sort of nuanced in that there are situations that you can't account for when doing this sort of deck tech, and there will always be corner cases. But in general, we can build piles to win through Chalice of the Void. And actually, I think there's one more card that deserves to be in this pile of must-have cards in the deck, and that's Cavern of Souls. There is a lot of power to knowing that against certain blue strategies, if you just resolve your Doomsday, if you blow up all of your hand, let's say you have a Dark Ritual, a Doomsday, a land, a Daze, a Force of Will, and a blue card, and you end up having to basically Daze a counterspell and then Force of Will another counterspell, but your Doomsday resolves. You now have 0 lands in play, you have 1 land in hand, and no more resources. But because we have Cavern of Souls, at least pre-board, there is a lot of decks that just, a lot of blue decks that can't keep up with that. That will end up they might end up sitting on a stack of counterspells, but unless they have actual Stifle, which can stifle the trigger on Thassa, or other sort of niche cards like a Blood Moon or something, then it's really just waiting for the inevitable. So Cavern of Souls is definitely a must-have in this deck, I think. And okay, so we have the must-have cards, and we have the disruption, and obviously you can tinker here. You could remove a Lotus Petal from the deck and add a 4th discard spell, or a Spell Pierce, or something like that. And then we have the Cyclers, these 3 cards here. I think you always want some number of Cyclers. I think 3 is on the high end, and 1 is on the low end, and 2 is probably a decent spot to be. You can have 1 of each. We have Street Wraith that can, on occasion, double up as a beatdown card. The fact that it has Swamp Walk is actually nothing. In the Doomsday Mirror, if a lot, not infrequently, Doomsdays will be surgically extracted, and it'll be about who gets to resolve a Swamp Walking 3/4 that the other person can remove. But having said that, its main purpose is obviously to cycle without paying mana. So drawing a card at instant speed, circumventing, well, not circumventing the stack, but it's not a spell. So it can't be countered, which is also pretty important. Let's say that this was let's say, for instance, that if Gataxian Probe was legal, and if you wanted to Gataxian Probe instead. Now, in a lot of ways, Gataxian Probe is a far superior card, but let's say that you are at a spot where you have your Thassa's Oracle in hand, and you build a pile with your 3 Cyclers and Cavern of Souls. That, that will beat a Flusterstorm, for instance, or a Spell Pierce. But if either of these Cyclers is a spell that goes onto the stack and it's a sorcery, then it gets targeted by those spells. So these cards are necessary, but they're definitely on this sort of weaker end of the scale of cards in this deck. So, but I want 3 in this. 3, like, the more Cyclers you have, that also increases the volatility of the deck and the velocity. Like, you'll get sort of silly hands with Cyclers, and they're sort of doubling as mystery cards. And if you cycle into a land, hey, this hand turns out great. If you don't, it's a mess. So it adds instability, but it also adds the frequency with which you can go off early, because and actually also, or actually maybe not go off early as much as win on the same turn. A lot of the time, you will have to pass the turn after resolving Doomsday, but if you have a Cycler in hand, that increases the chance that you can win on the same turn. And then we have these 14 spells, and 12 of them are probably familiar to most Legacy players. 4 Brainstorm, 4 Ponder, 4 Preordain. And basically, one of the weaknesses or critiques aimed at this deck is that it's a combo deck that only has 4 Doomsday. So, there are games where you get to turn 10 and you're looking at your graveyard and there are like 2 Ponders, a Brainstorm, and 3 Preordain, and you have still not seen a Doomsday. So compare that to something like Sneak and Show, where you have at least, in maybe the archetypical build, you have 8 of each A and B combo piece. We only play an A. This deck is, in effect, a 1-card combo deck, and that's a strength, but we only have 4 copies. So Show and Tell has 4 Show and Tells and 4 Sneak Attacks. We have to rely on these 14 cards to find Doomsday, basically, and other pieces we need. And I have chosen Limdul's Vault as Doomsday's 5 and 6. Some people prefer Personal Tutor. I prefer Limdul's Vault. Limdul's Vault lets you basically tutor up any card you need, whereas Personal Tutor only lets you tutor up Doomsday. Sometimes you need a Dark Ritual and not the Doomsday, or whatever. Personal Tutor obviously has a big advantage at costing a mana less, but then it also reveals what you're doing. So it's sort of a give and take. I think both cards are fairly weak in power level, and they are card disadvantage, but against certain types of decks, particularly ones without Force of Will or other blue cards, they tend to sort of just increase your wins because they let you find Doomsday more often. But I think actually having these 12 cantrips also acts as sort of pseudo additional copies of Doomsday. I guess that's a pretty obvious thing to say, but having these cards lets you filter your draw step. Basically, it gives you control over the cards you're going to see, and that is a way to sort of circumvent having only 4 cards that you need to find. But it's not nothing, it is a weakness. I think if as a theoretical exercise, let's say that there was actually a second version of Doomsday that, that did the same thing and cost the same, that had the same mana cost or whatever, so it was functionally the same, but just had a different name. I think you would want to play 5 or 6 copies total of Doomsday. I don't think you would want 8, because if you have a Doomsday in your hand and you're choked on mana, for instance, then you don't want to draw a second Doomsday. Or if you have a Doomsday and you're sort of searching for disruption or whatever, then drawing a second Doomsday, maybe not what you want. So I don't think it's apparent you would want 8 copies. Anyways, the last thing to mention is the mana base. It's fairly reminiscent of what like Ad Nauseam Tendrils would play. You got 8 fetches. You could go up to 9, maybe cut the second basic island. I like having the second basic island. There are times, this is Edge of Autumn aside, this is a pure Grixis build, as I'll get to in the sideboarded cards. I have played 4 color versions that also wanted green sideboard cards, in which case the second island I would switch with a tropical island. This is a fairly... it's not wasteland resilient as such, but it does a decent job at it by having the second island. Basically, the way play patterns go, I think whenever you have Dark Ritual in your hand, you're very pleased to fetch out basic island. Whenever you don't have Dark Ritual in hand, you have to really probably be looking at fetching out the Underground Sea to be able to eventually hardcast Doomsday. All right, and I think lastly, I will just go over the sideboard. So I'm splashing red. See, I have a Badlands and a Volcanic Island. I'm only doing that for these 5 red cards. And honestly, the Abrade is not that important, in my opinion. I think you could switch this with like an Echoing Truth maybe or something, and you'd be fine. So it's basically to have access to the Red Blast, Pyroblast effect. Because a lot of things that matter against Doomsday has blue mana symbols in its casting cost. That, that be that Narset, Parter of Veils, through like Counter Magic, Force of Wills, whatever, through Hull Breacher, through Meddling Mage. A lot of these cards are very played right now. Days Undoing, like Hull Breacher, Days Undoing combo, is seeing a lot of play. I really don't think I could see myself playing a version of Doomsday that didn't have access to Red Blasts. Even when I've played quote-unquote Bug Doomsday, which I played a lot, it'll be like Bug, but then with like a red dual and 4 Pyroblast / Red Blast in the sideboard. Because against like blue-white X decks, I think the Pyroblasts are just priceless. You need them. That's my opinion. Doesn't mean it has to be that way. I'm okay only having 2 sort of graveyard hate cards. But that's in part also because I have these 2 Force of Negations to bring in as well against fast combo and graveyard combo. The defense grids are there solely really to bring in versus Delver. Like Delver of Secret Strategies has traditionally been sort of a weakness for Doomsday. We've tinkered and tried a lot, and the best experiences I had was with like playing Uru and bug cards and a lot of removal. But that doesn't really work in this build of the deck because it really, really swells up your sideboard, and it basically requires you to put sideboard cards in your main deck to free up enough space, and you become this sort of mid-range Doomsday deck with Baleful Strix and stuff in the main deck. So I would build the sideboard. I built the sideboard, and I'm happy with it. And the defense grids are there for Delver. As the way Legacy is right now, I don't think I would want defense grid. Certainly not against any other combo deck. Like, bring in defense grid when like 10 cards in your deck post sideboard are counter spells. Against like Show and Tell, for instance, just seems like a massive own goal. So I wouldn't bring in defense grids there. And when like half of the control decks are playing Hull Breacher and Days Undoing, even only as like funsies or fun-ofs or whatever the saying is, it's just too big of a risk to shut yourself down on your opponent's turn. So this is for Delver. It's pretty potent against Delver. They basically have to like hard counter this. I have the Hull Breacher to bring in against the Mirror and Show and Tell and any Grizzlebrand strategy basically. It's definitely sort of on the fringes. I think you could swap this with something else. Then I got Brazen Borrower and Abrade as my sort of anti-Chalice of the Void, Trinisphere tech. Brazen Borrower, incidentally, is decent against Merit Lage strategies. And a Massacre. These cards, I feel like these 3 cards, you could really interchange them with different stuff, depending on your preferences. You like Echoing Truth, you like Chain of Vapor. Heck, maybe even Lightning Bolt, I don't know. So, that was a brief run-through of this deck. It's a lot of fun to play, and I think it's a very good deck. It has some weaknesses. Primarily, I think Delver of Secret Strategies, but yeah, Delver is not the whole meta, and especially the way the format is right now, who's to say what'll end up sort of being good? It's very good against non-blue strategies. It's very good, I think, in the combo mirror. I think it's extremely good there actually, and it's just a very powerful like thing to be doing in Legacy and very fun. So, and I think the last thing I'll say is just a disclaimer for anyone who thinks that this deck is like way too hard to play or impossibly difficult, or you have to be like a math professor or something. That is just not the case. Not at all. Not even close. You can't just sleeve this up, not having played any reps with it, and then expect to do well instantly. But the fact that Thassa's Oracle has just streamlined the actual win condition so much, it means that it's just a lot more reasonable to expect to be able to do well with this deck. You need to practice, of course, but you don't need to like you don't need to go to school for the Doomsday Academy for like 2 years or something. Back in the day, there were like before Thassa's Oracle was printed, there were Doomsday decks that had all these very very complex ways they could win. That they played Burning Wish, and there were like Doomsday piles that won with like casting Burning Wish for Time Spiral and casting Time Spiral and casting Doomsday a second time and building up Storm and then killing with Tendrils. So all of that has been sort of just made kind of obsolete, I think, by Thassa's Oracle. It's just an incredibly smooth and synergistic win condition.